I'm on a mission to help people not just be more authentic, but do authentic and understand that authenticity is actually a strategic advantage in trust, connection, differentiation. It's about exposing who you are when people least expect it. Heaven forbid, don't freaking keep it at 0 or 1 like most people do. I would be doing a disservice if I didn't tell everyone listening to apply the 50% rule to what I just said.
The weather may be cold outside, but it is really cozy here in the 𝗕𝗺𝗍𝗍 Cafe. Your homie has his coffee cup, as does my guest, sipping from it. That's what we're all about here at the 𝗕𝗺𝗍 Cafe, sipping on our coffee and relaxing. I have the best guest ever with me. Her name is Erin Hatzikostas. Erin, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Oh my gosh. So first of all, I said this to you before, but I think this is going to be the most fun and the most challenging interview I've done because you are the most fun and most challenging friend I think I have. Yeah, Erin Hatzikostas. I am a former corporate CEO turned professional pot stirrer. And basically, I am totally fed up with the BS in the working world, the buzzwords, the fakeness, the crap. And I'm on a mission to help people not just be more authentic, but do authentic and understand that authenticity is actually a strategic advantage in trust, connection, differentiation. It is the thing that is going to help you succeed.
And I have no doubt whatsoever that by the time this episode is over, anyone watching will understand exactly why you, Erin, are so differentiated in this world. And why, by the way, you chose the Greek goddess that we're going to commence this discussion with. That goddess was the one and only Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. She was the mistress of the wild. She was the patron of animals, of childbirth, of virginity, and also, significantly, of dancing. Some of the images that are most vivid throughout literature and even art of Artemis involve her dancing in the wild. It might be under the moonlight, probably with the nymphs who were her attendants, but it represented a freedom of spirit. She was a goddess that early on in her life made the chief god Zeus promise that she would never have to marry. Why? Because she wanted to experience that totality of her existence fully without the encumbrances that marriage would bring upon the deities at the time. Artemis was deeply differentiated. She also was both authentic and really quirky. Erin, I've got to say, you lean into your quirkiness just like Artemis. But was that why Artemis spoke to you, or was it something deeper?
Yeah, I think it was that. And then it was literally the dancing. I say this all the time. I love to dance where you're not supposed to dance. And it's not just metaphorical, it's literal. It's a personal pattern I have. Like if you said to me, Erin, come into New York, let's go to the club and let's dance, I would be mortified. You know why? Because in a club, you're supposed to dance and you're supposed to look good at doing it. You're supposed to be good, right? And I have like this allergic reaction to doing things where you're supposed to, mainly because it's really hard to differentiate. The only way you can differentiate in that dance club is to be a really freaking good dancer. And that's hard and that's exhausting. And instead, if you said, hey, Erin, you want to come in, you want to go to this Irish pub, we'll just chill, we'll have a couple pints. And then like some great music breaks out and I had an opportunity to dance where I wasn't supposed to dance, I would be ecstatic. It would be the best night ever because there were no expectations that it's not just that I'm a deviant, and I want to like break the rules, but it's literally a personal pattern I have. I write about it in the second book. I ran the hurdles in high school. I'm 5'2.5".
What?
We met in person, but I'm not that tall. I'm short. And like, why would I pick the race where you run over metal towers of terror, right? And people would ask me, I never had a good answer until I sort of analyzed it in context of everything I believe in and everything I teach. Well, the reason I think back, it was like, well, I was not the fastest runner. And running isn't something, yes, you can train, you can get faster, but like you're kind of born with the mechanics you're born with, right?
Right.
And I wasn't going to go from being a semi good sprinter to being the best sprinter. But if instead I do the thing where less people do the thing, the hurdles, right? And in a way I say it's easier to compete on the unusual than to compete with the usual. And so that's what I loved about her story. She did things her own way. That's a big, like, simple tag of mine. You should not do something because you hate the way it was done before. Instead, do it your own way. But I think the dancing got me too. I mean, so many stories of me dancing at a leadership conference when my leadership coaches told me I shouldn't dance, that I was going to basically make an ass of
Mhm.
myself. And so I just love the metaphorical and the literal, doing whatever the frick she wants because she wants to.
There actually is a lot hidden underneath that remark or that set of remarks. And we're going to roll up our sleeves and dive into all of them, Miss Hatzikostas. But before we do that, I have to comment about a couple of things. First of all, the idea of that dancing wherever you want to and really feeling it when you do, as opposed to mandatory fun like at a club. It reminds me of another god, Dionysus, whose nymphs, the maenads, would get full of this spirit. People associated it at the time with drunkenness, but really it was the joyful, exuberant spirit
Mm,
of Dionysus himself, and they would just go crazy with these
feel it.
wild, ecstatic dances. And then also Artemis being someone who she wanted to be against the odds and against expectations, and dancing in the moonlight because that's who and what she wanted to do and who and what she was inside. Your true spirit coming out. How did you navigate that in corporate America?
I'm not a great dancer, but I love to do the Running Man. I love to look silly. I look totally ridiculous doing it. That is part of who I am, right? I always love to use a little humility to make people more attracted, to connect and trust me. And doing a really shitty Running Man seems to have been has worked, right? It's one of the data points. But it's also part strategic, whether it's one, I can win the race because there's less people running the race, not just literally in the sense of running the hurdles in track in high school, but also if I think about being a corporate executive and having a bunch of peers that would I would sit around a table every month and see them literally, right, as we did our monthly operating reviews or our quarterly business reviews. And I knew that I wasn't going to win by working harder. I wasn't going to get on a plane more than the dudes to go meet with clients. I wasn't going to work till 10 o'clock at night like my friend Kristen would do. Like, I I'm not saying I'm lazy, but I knew that that's not how I was gonna, quote, unquote, "win." Not that it's all a contest, but I knew that I had some things they didn't have, and I had these data points and this experience, that authenticity, that telling this a story at our monthly operating review would grab the attention of my somewhat stuffy, mean boss, that going into negotiations, not with a super firm strategy, but trying to connect with the person and understand what was important to them, was gonna win. And so, yeah, I think it's part who I am, and this is a big part of what I teach. Like, the first thing I teach when I talk about authenticity is, like, it's not about you people. It's not about authenticity is not be yourself. That is not the definition. And the Greek root, since we're deep diving into my
Yeah.
married culture, the Greek root is authentikos. And authentikos means to be genuine, but it also means to be original, and it means to be authoritative. So the concept of authenticity, people get so excited about it because they're like, "Yeah, I wanna go into work being myself." But then they're like, "Oh, crap, but that's not gonna work because if everybody else is gonna just be themselves, like, we're gonna be a bunch of, like, neuron morons bumping up against each other." And so that is a big part of what I try to teach, is that authenticity is actually not about you. It's actually about connecting with others. It's about exposing who you are when people least expect it, in the service of others, so that you can create that trust and those connections. So it isn't just as simple as, it's maybe 50% bringing your unique self, but 50% it's more strategic, whether in the broader sense or in the micro sense of, like, your strategy is actually to create the connection and trust that you need to win over employees, make a sale, stand out in a business meeting, or just do life. in
I
general.
have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about 50% today, because I will note that behind you there is a book called The 50% Rule that I am a proud owner of, and you are
And you're
really,
in?
yeah, and it is very, very good. And I read your first book, which is Over Your Other Shoulder, so I'm officially a fan. We're going to talk about all of that a little bit more, but there's a word that you said earlier when it came to authenticity that I want to explore a little bit further, and that was authoritative. Authoritative. I have had clients, when I coach them on being authentic, but also finding their power, who have said things like, well, but the authentic real me is basically a weakling or insecure or this, that, and the other. Artemis, as someone who truly was living authentically, particularly as a female in this era, didn't just resign herself to obscurity, living authentically, as you said. She owned her place on Mount Olympus with a throne. And by the way, as a deity associated heavily with nature, and I'm not saying this is an authoritative that I want someone to emulate, but her punishments were notoriously severe, because what they represented was the pushback of nature with all of its force if nature was violated, although one could say maybe that justified severity. I don't know. But nonetheless, authoritativeness. Talk to us a little bit about the role of authoritativeness, particularly if you feel in your nature that isn't there, or maybe you're afraid that authoritativeness means dictatoriality.
Yeah, and I think, first of all, it's a Greek root word, right? So I think authoritative in modern day society, maybe rightfully so, is a little bit one-sided, heavy-handed. I think the word that really they meant by it is competent. That there is a level of competency of knowledge, that you're not just a freewheeling, original, genuine person. And I would go back actually and just talk about some research, which I talk about in the 50% rule. There was a study done back in the 60s, and the theory was that basically when you have a kind of a humility moment and imperfection, that they're actually more likable. And back then they called it a pratfall. And so the concept was that having these imperfections was good. So they did a study, and they had four cohorts, and essentially these people were being judged whether or not they could be in like a trivia thing. So it was very black and white. They were trying to select these candidates, and the people selecting the candidates did not know that there was a study being done. And the first cohort were competent, and they also had a pratfall. And the pratfall was simply at the end of their interview, they said, "Oh, I spilled coffee on my shirt." Right. So they've sort of manufactured that. The second was less competent with the pratfall. So they had less credentials, weren't as good at answering the questions, et cetera. And then they had another group who didn't have the pratfalls, right? So they were competent and less competent. And what they found is that the people that were both competent and had the pratfall were by far the most selected group, even over those that were competent without the pratfall, without the imperfection. But what they found is in that group that were clearly less competent, when they had that sort of imperfection, that pratfall, they were selected less. And so what that said is that you have to have this 50-50 combination. There's a chapter in my book I call it Halvesies Your Humility. So it's like, yes, humility or having this imperfection that you expose is super powerful, but you have to combine that with the competence or maybe the authoritative. To me, that's sort of the more modern way of saying it. If you can combine those two together to say, look, and maybe we all have our insecurities, and maybe your client has insecurities, but they know their stuff, right? They know what they're talking about in the area they're talking about, or if they're a leader, like they understand the product, the business, they bring some competence, and they then can combine that juxtapose almost with these imperfections, these humility moments that they expose. Like that is the combination of all combinations. And so that's how I would sort of look at authoritative. I think it's more really about the competence that you combine with being original and being genuine that really creates this thing where people go, oh, they're so authentic, and I love it.
I cannot help but ask myself then if what you've just said defines what I found to be, in my many years with big organizations, especially in these executive positions, that line that you can't cross when it comes to authenticity, right? Like sometimes people have taken authenticity to, as you described earlier, mean that I can, wear pink hair with glue and horn-shaped pigtails, stepping into the office and then expecting the entire team of bankers that I work for to follow me. Other people have taken it to mean a very free and broad expression of emotions. But how far does that go is where it can be tough. And I'm sort of hearing, well, if the authentic expression that you might be engaged in put your very competence at risk in any way, you really might want to have some second thoughts about whether you want to be the person who, like Cher, says, hey, someone's got to be ridiculous, why not me? Well, maybe not completely ridiculous sometimes.
The best thing to think about isn't so much the what kills your competence, but I think it goes back to so I took all of that data and said, okay, then what is authenticity, right? And the definition I use is it's about exposing who you are when people least expect it in the service of others. And I think that if you can always think, not what do people think of me, but how is my authenticity potentially serving others? So in that example with like the pink horns and crown, like you might think that's totally me, but that might make some people feel uncomfortable. But if I at least expose my pink hair, I don't try to pretend that I'm brunette or blonde or whatever, that's probably giving permission to a lot of people to go, "Oh, thank God." Like, hey, did you know I have a full sleeve tattoo? Hey, did you know that on my off time, I'm obsessed with Formula One racing and I'm embarrassed about it. But now that you have your pink hair out, like, I'll admit that, like, I spend my weekends, whatever, So I found that in the 5 years, whatever, that I've been speaking and talking with groups, the thing that most helps people is to first say, like, how can I do my authenticity in service of others? Not, again, not to conform, not to impress, but in a way that I know that I'm doing it actually for them first, to make them feel more at ease, to give them permission, to make them feel like they can open up about something. That's how I think it's easier to calibrate this line that you talk about versus, really saying, okay, at what point am I going to bring down confidence? I will tell you, I was CEO for a subsidiary company. The CEO of that company, who went on to become the CEO of a Fortune 5 company and is very prim and proper, for the most part, blonde, tiny little woman. Her chief of staff, I think was her role, had purple hair. And I remember the first time, right? Like I had heard her name or whatever, and you finally like get up to the big office to meet and you're like, didn't see that coming. And the relaxation, the permission, just that little extra of walking in and being like, okay, these people in this office, including her sort of right hand, aren't completely these stale whatever. It really helped me a ton. And I think if you can be on the other side and be like, yeah, my purple hair's for me, but it also, when they walk into her office and probably feeling a little bit dressed to meet with the big, it probably helps them. And I think that's really how you have to think about it.
Thinking about this broader concept of whether the authenticity that you're engaging in or the connection and self-expression that you're talking about is really in service to yourself or to others or something bigger raises some interesting questions. Going back to Artemis, what she was, the goddess of nature, the goddess of an entity that was wild, that could never be truly controlled, and did create its own rules. One of the things that I like to share with my own clients, and I would be curious to hear your thoughts about this generally, is that the ultimate form of self-empowerment is when you are able to fully self-create, to say who and what I am is my own creation and no one else's. That's the power of a God. But it is true, what are you serving in self-creating? And what are the boundaries of your responsibility? So, for instance, if there was a conflict, let's say I wanted to dye my hair purple, Heaven forbid, because this skin would not look good against purple. I would pity. There's no way that would serve anyone except those who like torture. But let's say I somehow managed to look good with purple hair. I might do that to inspire those around me, but to effectively serve those in the orbit outside of those perhaps that work within my organization, that ultimately might be such a turnoff that I may have a reconsideration about it. And so when I think about, well, in service to others, what that might mean, what are the boundaries that you might suggest people think about? How far does the orbit of your service to others potentially go?
It depends on the person. So, me coming into this interview, knowing who you are, a very unique, outgoing person,
You.
my authenticity dial, if you think of it as a dial, right, is more in the sort of the 8, 9, 10 range, right? I, for example, met a CEO this summer, sort of cold introduction. Well, I guess a warm introduction from somebody, but in the insurance world, got on the call. You can tell he's very sort of traditional gentleman, talking with the big words. I didn't turn that dial to 0 or 1 because that wasn't serving. I turned the dial to like a 3 and a 4, and I might have used a word, like one of my favorite words is like to use the word poopy or something, like, instead of shit, or
Mm-hmm.
just a little something that's, and then I'll watch. And I did, and I watched him kind of smile. And it's sort of like this transformation. And so in that 30-minute meeting, part of my goal was to get him to loosen up. Not necessarily because, oh, it'll be more fun to talk with somebody who's a little more loosened up. Our conversation, that 30-minute, and then we set up another meeting the next week. I ended up working with this client. The depths of our conversation were so much better because we could connect once I got him to be a little less buzzwordy and a little, and then I like gave him permission to, and now we're talking like humans, and like our ability to, me to understand really where he wanted to go, his ability to understand how I might be able to help him was just so much faster than if I would have not turned that dial and let us sort of stay at this like transactional, let's sound like smart business people. So to me, it's really a dial depending on your audience. And I'm always cautious when I say that. So many people be like, well, I don't know this person. They're a prospect. And well, I didn't know him either. But that doesn't mean I turn the dial to 0. It means the dial's now down at like a 3 because I want to plug into him. I wouldn't come talk to him like I've known you forever. You're
Right.
not an insurance exec that's, boring. And so I think it's really about that dial and being like, you know what? The more I can keep notching it up and observing how they smile, how they loosen up, how they tell me things they wouldn't have, that they feel more comfortable, we connect more. That's really what you're looking to do with your authenticity.
Artemis had many aspects and many different versions depending on where exactly you were worshiping her. She had the aspect as the virgin goddess of the hunt, right? She had the aspect of like I mentioned earlier, the dancer. If you went to Ephesus in Turkey, they had a temple to her that was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But the statues of Artemis there actually went the opposite direction of the virginity. It went into almost a fertility motif for her. And she had like these gigantic necklaces that we think were bull testicles. There may have been other things like that, but they were all fertility.
Gotta have something.
Yeah, they were something that had something to do with something, she looked completely differently. And what I'm hearing when you're talking is an understanding as part of authenticity, but maybe I'm overreading stuff, of the different aspects of you. In order to be an Olympian deity, she had to have a breadth of things to offer to the world to bring her appeal outside of the narrowest tiny range. And then she had to be able to both be in touch with those and present those aspects in ways that people could pick or pull from as was necessary or appropriate for their cultural needs and for the needs that they had to get from a goddess. Am I
Yeah.
sort of understanding you correctly
Yeah.
here?
I mean, she all through all of those stories was the same person. And I am the same person. I don't feel like I'm code switching. I don't feel like I'm changing who I am. But especially, it's not just the workplace. It's in all of you. Like, if I meet somebody at, a kid's event, like my goal is to connect with them. And so again, like the dial of my authenticity, it's a personal event. So that now we're more at like maybe a 5 or 6, but it's not at a 8, 9, 10. I still feel like the same person. I don't feel like I'm being somebody. I'm just turning up the volume of this real Erin, the more relaxed Erin. The words that I'm using are becoming more and more human and commonplace. It's really just like if you had a have one of those stinky plug-in smelly air freshener things, right? I'm not an air freshener person.
I'm allergic to him.
They're horrible. I went to a car wash the other day. He goes, I'm only asking because I really like to help people. Would you like an air freshener? And I was like, okay, first of all, nice sales training that you took. Second of all, and of course, I was totally authentic myself. I was, instead of being like, no, thank you, I was like, oh God, no, I hate air fresheners. I said to him, sorry, your sales training is not working. But right, those air fresheners, it's like you put them in a room, they have little dials, you can turn them up, right? It's still the same smell, but if it's a bigger room, you can actually open up the vents more and expose more of that smell.
Let's say, though, that you decide to dial it up to an 8, 9, or heaven forbid, a 10. Maybe even 10, 12, 15, whatever. And you realize as you're engaging in the conversation or you're in whatever situation you're in, the people are starting to frown. They ain't taking it well. How do you pull back? Because if I've come out there waving my bow and arrow and everyone's sitting there with a white handkerchief, like, what do I do to regain my credibility again?
Yeah, I mean, you turn it down a little bit. It's all about always reading and again, your goal is to connect, right? And so you should be watching those signs. Am I connecting with this person? Are they smiling more? Are they nodding more? Are they paying attention versus looking over their shoulder? And if you start to get wild and crazy and seem disengaged, and maybe just kind of turn it down a little bit. I don't want people to overcomplicate this, like, and be super mechanical about it, because that sounds like work and that sounds exhausting. And I'm telling you, I've sort of done this and I've preached authenticity for a long time. It's actually the least exhausting thing ever because the alternative sucks in those business world situations. It's very stuffy and nobody's saying exactly what they want to say and blah, blah, blah. So you're already in a place that's a hell of a lot better than if you that kept it at 0, where most business interactions seem to, or maybe they'll start at a 5, like, oh yeah, it was a ball game, da, da, da. And then next thing you know, you're like, wait, when did we go back to a 0? When did we like have a 5-minute, conversation? And now we're like talking about the, the widgets and the business buzzword and like, so it's just a much more fun place to play. So always try to play in like that 3 to 7 and just keep playing the dial. But like, heaven forbid, don't freaking keep it at 0 or 1. Like most people do. Start to turn it up and just watch for the signs and continue to have your number one goal to really connect with whoever you're working with, talking with.
And I have to say, thinking about everything that you just said, that people can survive more than we give them credit for sometimes. I mean, look, I was general counsel of a social services organization that's pretty large, and it was very conservative. It ran homeless shelters and domestic violence shelters. And particularly in the domestic violence space, a lot of these women had been essentially kept economic hostages by their husbands. And so they didn't know how to interview or interact in the world. And so to model the safest route to these individuals getting back into the employment space, the organization, which was also, I have to add, historically African-American, and really had an understanding about the brunt of racism that could be playing in the minds of its constituents in addition to the domestic violence. Right? They were very conservative. We walked around in suits. We spoke very properly. We referred to each other, at least in front of the individuals that were in the shelters, as Mr. or Ms. Generally, even in casual conversation, everything was Mr. or Ms. If they had a PhD, doctor, this, that, and the other. But I wore my 1980s skinny ties, and I got some funky glasses and some orange shoes. They were dress shoes, and people did survive. They managed to wake up the next morning.
They did more than survive, Scott. They did more than survive. I am certain they freaking loved you, and it gave them permission. They gave them permission to at least like throw out their heels and put on some sneaks or something, right? Like just something.
All right, exactly. But Erin, keep it real with me. Sometimes when I bought those orange shoes, I was annoyed by all of the Mr. and Ms. and all that sort of stuff. I was annoyed by the suits, and I was determined to break this habit a little bit my own way. So, okay, orange shoes were my start. I was motivated a little bit by Defiance. Erin, have you ever been motivated by Defiance? Just be honest with us here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think at a macro level, and then there's a bazillion micro, that the biggest Defiance that I thrived on was being sort of the female underdog, even in a pretty heavily female industry, modern-ish day. And look, does it piss me off that, there's still so many challenges with women and equality and equity and all that? 100%. But I always love those situations. Like, I'll give you a story.
Please.
So I was CEO of this company, about 1,000 people, really had turned it around. We were doing well. And I got a call from our corp dev folks, and they had some questions. They said, oh, well, Dan, who was my boss, who really knew nothing about the business, great guy, but he ran a bunch of other businesses within the larger enterprise. And we're going to meet with this. It was like a private equity firm that we're just entertaining it. We probably won't do it, but that looks at investing in companies, taking them out of the enterprise, infusing them with money, and then sort of running them separately. So a pretty major structure, right? This would be us reselling my business because it had been acquired before. So pretty big deal, whatever. Now, I could have gotten pissed, but I was like, I answered their questions. And after coming back to me about 3 times, they're like, oh, maybe you should be at that meeting, which I was like, you think? Novel idea. I might know something about something. I am the CEO, and you guys know nothing. So we go into New York, of course, for this meeting. In my mind, I'm like, we've got a really freaking good business. We had done a major turnaround. Financials were great. Employee engagement and culture was great. So we go in. Of course, we go to prep with the bankers that we've hired on our side, all men, old white men. And, of course, they had put together a bazillion versions, and we had this deck, probably like 30, 40 pages long presentation. And so the guys kind of giving us advice, and when you meet with them, talk about this stuff and and I'm, so I know kind of where to start. Like, I'm a very self-aware person. I'm a good presenter, right? I am not that person that's going to go in and be like, page 1, page 2, page 3. Like, I'm competent, right?
Thank goodness, by the way, for those who had to listen to you.
And then he looks at me. And I remember this. I'm like, he would never have asked this of a man. He goes to me, hey, Erin, are you nervous? And I replied to him, I said, no, why would I be nervous? They're the ones should be nervous. I have a really great business. So that story doesn't end there. So that was one moment. So meanwhile, I've been through so many of these that this is what happens in my head. I literally shuffle it. Instead of getting pissed, I go, thanks for the story, right? Like, you can't make this shit up. Thank you so much for the story. So I file it in my head. So we go into the room, and the private equity firm, which, by the way, I was a pretty young CEO. I'm in my early 40s, but these guys were, of course, like in their 30s. They had the fancy names and but they were young. But they were very nice or whatever. And they're sitting on one side. We're sitting on the other side. And this guy that asked me if I'm nervous is sitting right next to me. So I start to present. And I can tell you, I'm crushing it. Like, I know how to connect with people. I'm talking high level. This guy, while I'm talking, is got the presentation in front of me and is like pointing down to like the next page that I should go to. And then the next page I should go to. And the next page while I'm talking, Scott. And I remember thinking to the Defiance question, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to physically, slowly, this is going to be fun. I am going to, thank God for rolling chairs. I'm just going to slowly inch further and further and further. And so I remember while I'm talking, consciously being like, anytime I had a time to kind of shift in my seat, I'm like, okay, got an inch there, got an inch there. So by the end of the time, he didn't notice it, but I'm, now I'm like a solid foot away from him, and he can't, do it. So that's the place that when you ask the question about Defiance, I think of the most. And it's a hard thing to instill in women because there's a lot of women that should be angry and should be upset and are taken advantage of. But I think the more you can, not just as a woman, but as an underdog, let's just talk about anybody that's an underdog, which so many of us are an underdog, right? Yeah. The more you can sort of revel in it and rebel in it, revel and rebel, and use it as a place, A, to collect stories, and 2, to sort of slowly be more and more defiant and try to have fun with it. Life's too short not to do that. And that's what I've done.
It harkens back to what we talked a little bit earlier about self-creation and that being a power of the deities. And what other powers did the deities have outside of self-creation, and that flowed from their power of self-creation, but of course the power to be the subject of the myths that we still share today. And it's interesting that in answering this particular question, you chose to move into storytelling mode. There is an interview that I did with another guest named Matt Zahn, who talked about strategic storytelling and its relationship to being a leader and business and the whole host of things that we talk about here in the Myth Slayer Cafe. But that conversation is slightly different, but feeds into this, which is what you did by translating the story and by giving the advice, put it in your story bank, was you were urging people to self-mythologize, to create mythologies about their lives like the gods. To what extent do you view behaviors like analyzing these stories, understanding your stories, as strategic in nature as opposed to just random stories that happen to you? And if so, how do you do that?
1000% strategic. I mean, I think, first of all, for me, the reason I became so good at sort of using authenticity as my strategy was because I had collected so much data along the way. And part of that quote unquote data, first it was watching my father having success and subconsciously seeing his authenticity propel him in his career. But then it was collecting the data around, for example, when I tell a story at a meeting, people are so much more engaged. What do we naturally do? We go, maybe I should do that more. And then I think, well, how do I do that more? Part of it is I've got to continue to collect them. So it was evolution over time. Definitely in the last, 5 years now that I've slowed down and I'm teaching this, I'm no longer running as a CEO and just collecting data and spewing it back out. And now I'm able to reflect and say, what happened? Like, collecting stories is so strategic because, first of all, every story has 3, 4, 5 sort of pillars or lessons, right? Like, so if you have even 5 really good stories, you already have 15 different, at least, applications, because the lesson for that could been one thing, could been another, it could be push for this, push for that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's one of the pillars of my 6 pillars of strategic authenticity is storytelling, and stands for narrating, and the humans framework that I have in my first book. Stories are remembered 22 times more than data points, but people struggle with it. And to me, I always teach them the first thing you do is about collecting the stories versus, having a situation where you're like, oh, I should tell a story. What the hell should I say? Well, if you have a story library in your head of 10 great stories, and I'll tell you 5 to 8 of mine, I could, if you said, Erin, gun to your head, tell 5 to 8 stories about a time where you were sort of belittled or in a situation as a woman, I would crush it. Ready, set, go. I would tell you those. I wouldn't have to think. I've got them ready. Not because I'm pissed off, well, because I know the power of those. And it's so much more fun to go through that stuff too, when you know that in the end you're going to be able to use it for positive things. It makes those hellish situations so much better.
You mentioned, by the way, a few minutes ago that when you were delivering this presentation, you were confident about it because you know how to get up there and speak, and you know how to deliver a message in a way that is fundamentally competent. I would say, and you probably would admit too, if a gun was held to your head, that it's far above and beyond competent. I've seen your TEDx talk, and your speaking career is going very well. So that's proof in the pudding. That being said, I was coaching a client once on charisma, and one of the things that I suggested to her was that in order to really have naturally, internally based charisma, as opposed to just sort of manufactured fake acting style charisma, she needed to understand her stories and ascribe them the meanings that connected to her soul or her spirit. And she said to me, Scott, I don't have stories. I was like, that's impossible. Come
Your
on.
life is a collection of stories.
But what would you have
Literally.
told her? Yeah, I had things to tell her, but what would she have said? I'm lost. I haven't done anything significant. I haven't done.
That's one of the things I always talk about. People don't tell stories. What's one of the barriers? One of them is they think a story has to be, we hear all the, especially in like the TEDx stage of stuff, we hear I conquered Mount Everest with, with no limbs. I lost both my parents in a car accident. Or it's a hilarious story told on the moth, or it's like, that step number one is redefining what is a story. A story is literally telling something that happened before. Like, I'll give you an example. I was once I'm on the board of a company and we were doing some pitching. And that morning I had pulled weeds and I hate freaking pulling weeds. And we were talking about our capabilities. And I literally was like, you know what? It's just like this morning when I had to go out and pull weeds. Like, the hardest part about that is you have to make sure you get them at the root or they're just going to be bigger and better in a week's time. That's a story. That's a freaking story. It's boring as shit, but it is better than saying our capabilities at our company is about getting to the root cause. Da, da, da. So, like, I think that's the first thing. People need to lower the bar. The other thing I always tell people too is they try to think about them in work and they try to think of work stories. Just think of like, if you were going to the bar and having happy hour with a friend you hadn't seen since college, maybe it's been like 3 years. Like, what are some of the stories you would tell? It's the funniest story, something you messed up at work, something happened between you and your spouse. But start with your best stories that you'd tell over a glass of wine, and you'd be amazed at how many lessons they hold across the spectrum of, personal going to work going to personal. Like, start there. And then the second thing is, if you don't have any stories, it's kind of like if you haven't planted a tree, what's the best day to plant a tree? Well, it's today if you didn't plant it yesterday, right? And if you haven't really taken the time to reflect on stories, part of that is because you're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour. You're probably in 80,000 meetings. Like, you just got to start first with the discipline. Like, oh my God, my kid just said something so funny and I had such a great response. Okay, put it in your story library. Like, you have stories. You just don't think about them.
Artemis, as did every other Olympian, had a persona. She had like outside of this temple at Ephesus, she had a look that she carried herself in. She had like kind of a mini skirt and leather sandals and a bow and arrow and short hair with a little crescent over her forehead. And she had, icons associated with her. It might be a deer. It might be whatever other sort of animal, different types of trees. And like I said, these nymphs, all of this created a roundness, a fullness of imagery that made her Artemis, and of course, related to the stories that she had, supported them, and made the stories memorable. Yeah. I mention all of that because one of the things that you do as a speaker, I've observed, but maybe I'm just, again, maybe I'm the god of the doofuses here. I don't know. But you really are able to integrate a whole visual aesthetic into the message that you're sending, as well as the stories that you tell. Together, to me, that is what makes you a charismatic Olympian, and why I'm always so blown away by your accomplishments. Yet, I might be consistently blown away, Erin, but I'm somehow never surprised. And so when it comes to being able to then tie in things like a physical look and stories and all of that, how did you do that? And what would you say to those who also might look to you and say, okay, I kind of have a few stories. Yes, I remember those college nights when I was drunk, and I'm starting to write them down, and I'm going to be a little bit more of myself. But how can I move from where I am as, I don't know, the nymph of the god of the ditch down the street to Artemis sitting up on Mount Olympus and going by the name of Erin Hatzikostas when she manifests down here on Earth?
I do think that one of my natural God-given strengths is speaking. Now, I also want to tell you, there's a lot of shit I'm not good at, right? I'm not disciplined. You asked me to write, to draw anything. I'm the least artistic person. I can't cook, right? So first of all, and that's, why the part of the subtitle of my new book, Compete in a League of Your Own, is so important. And actually one of the chapters is about doing a SWOT analysis on yourself, like that age old, I call it the Olive Garden salad and breadsticks of strategic planning. It's a little bit old and crusty, but you've got to kind of SWOT yourself. And so in that S, I would say, yeah, it's speaking is one of my strengths. But then if I go to the W, like there's a lot of things there. And I think other people need to do that too. We get so caught up. I call it sleep running syndrome. When you read the book, chapter 2, actually, Scott, you have to read. Well, you're in chapter 1, but you have to read chapter 2, sleep running syndrome, because I also talk about Kansas and not going back to Kansas. And I talk about New York.
I'm
Like,
reading
please,
it now.
I mean, literally after this, you need to read chapter 2, sleep running syndrome, because there's so many things there. But beyond the Kansas, New York thing that you'll love, because that's part of who you are, we get caught in, I call them comparison cramps and copying calluses, which turn into perfection pain and self-doubt gout. And there's all these things that come. Like, so I know you're asking, like, how do you do all that? Like, the first thing is, I don't want anybody listening to be like, I will never, because you might not like speak, and you might still be able to give a great presentation in front of an executive, but like public speaking, I'm not saying that people don't have it, but like, I would just want to be really clear. Like, I say it all the time. I was lucky. I am doing what I was meant to do. Part of this is something that was given to me. Part of it, though, that I think is really applicable to your audience is that I don't craft my look, my talk. I've gotten to a really good place about, I'm not crafting it to compete with another speaker, to be better than. I am literally focused on, if I was in the audience, what would I want? Now, on the look, let's talk about physical looks. That's a half and half. That is, first of all, I am almost always in pants or jeans and sneakers. Why? Because I actually do a very physical, ridiculous, metaphorical unpacking a suitcase that you do not want to have me do in a dress or a skirt. Okay. So pants it is, which, that limits. And also 20 some years of corporate American running, I have terrible feet. I don't shove my feet any longer into those pointy shoes that make me look skinnier but hurt. So part of it is like, physically I have to do my talk, and I feel not only less exposed, but I feel more grounded too. If I'm in my sneakers, I'm in my jeans, like I feel like I have my real power, versus I love dresses and skirts. I really do. That's all I wore in corporate America. But so mostly I dress for myself, and then I also dress to give permission. Like I don't ever ask. Like they'll be like, they'll be like, it's business casual. I'm like, I don't fucking care what it is. Like, I'm going to wear what I'm going to wear, because part of it is, it's about authenticity and I need to demonstrate. So I never wear anything to be showy. I wear something that I think is a little bit cool. It's a little bit comfortable. It's a little bit different than everybody else is going to be wearing. Because back to the hurdles thing and not competing in the same league, I'm not going to try to have, the perfect outfit that a lot of these people might come with, from, the boutique, their $500 suits or whatever. And then in terms of crafting it, that can translate whether you're an aspiring speaker, or many people probably listening aren't, but they want to be able to communicate better, whatever that application is, to present their business, to present to executives, to talk to their kids. I hate to sound like a broken record. It all goes back to connection. And how do they really understand it? So I think one of the thing that people most love about my You Do You-ish talk is my orange suitcase. And I unpack it, and I do this metaphorical comedy sort of act of all the crap that's weighing them down at work, with these props that come out of my suitcase, and then I customize them to their company. The reason I do that, though, wasn't to make like this big, I'm not a comedian. Like I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do a bit. It was because when I was trained in public speaking, I was told that one of the things you have to do is you have to really sit in the problem. And the reason you have to sit in the problem is people are more likely to listen to your solution if you've got them going, you know what? That is my problem. I need to hear a solution instead of just, and that's not my nature. I'm not a problem person. I'm an instant gratification whore. I want to move. I want to go fast to the solution. Like, let me just tell you what you need to do, right? But I learned that's not what works for everybody else. So then I remember writing my talk, and I remember writing all these words about the problem, blah, blah, blah. And then I would try to memorize it. And I'm like, what did I say again? And what did I talk about the problem? And then I finally realized, one, there was a dip in laughter. Like I had some other joke, and then I'm like, there's too long of a period where it's too serious. And what if I seek inspiration and try to make this more metaphorical? And then I talked to a friend who's a comedy writer. I thought she would write me a bit. She didn't. She said, I'm going to tell you how to do it. You get out a piece of paper, you write down some words, you do a word association. I wrote down 2, maybe 3 words. I wrote down baggage. I go, holy shit. There's going to be a suitcase. I'm going to unpack it. I'm going to make this problem, instead of talking about the big, fat, horrible words, I'm actually going to demonstrate it. And time again, when people come up to me, oh my God, I loved your talk, I always ask, what was one thing that really stuck with you? And they say, it was the suitcase. They don't then go, you were so funny. They say, that was so representative of what I feel at work. And so, it's really gets down to like, okay, here's what people tell me to do, sit in the problem, but what would I want? Would I want to listen to a bunch of words, or would I want it in a different way? And then just finding a way to be more creative to make that happen.
Understanding what's simply really beyond your realistic capabilities. Even as I was listening to you throughout the past few minutes, I was thinking that's to me a large part of authenticity too. For instance, I will never have the capability to come up with all of these snappy sort of 2 words descriptions, like whatever it was, gout that you had, and all of
Self-doubt, gout.
Yes, all of those sorts of those really
Perfection,
clever
pain. Yeah.
Exactly. I just can't do it. I try. ChatGPT might be able to help, but let's face it, ChatGPT ain't very authentic, at least for that sort of thing. But then also, one of the things that you're talking about is sitting in the problem. Erin, for me to really step into my own authenticity, there was the Defiance-based authenticity, and there was the reaction against suppression and wanting to have fun in my life authenticity that has driven a lot of my early attempts to be more authentic, and the attraction to people like you who really do bring something that's unique and fun and different to work. But I couldn't really use authenticity to connect with anyone until I sat in my problems. And for me, the big thing that kept me from really being able to sit in them was that for a long time, I just wouldn't acknowledge the pain or my own darkness. And sometimes when I work with people, particularly some female clients that I've mentored or worked with in speaking, there's a drive or a desire to only present the light. Now, that light is authentic, the energy, the positivity, the niceness, but there's not, and I understand there's reasons for that, the ability to truly acknowledge or accept the dark or the pain or whatever it is that it was like to experience that problem. Do you have any thoughts or advice about that for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be cliche, we only grow when we really understand that stuff. And I think the biggest problem is we just don't give ourselves the space or the avenue to do that. And sometimes when we have that avenue just be within our own head, then we take that darkness and just make it darker instead of thinking it out loud, talking with others. I think we all know that understanding the challenges we've been through, the pain, the things that hold us back is important. I think a lot of times the solution is, okay, I'm just going to think about it. And then thinking about it just makes you feel worse. And sometimes I think whether it's a therapist, a friend, a coach, writing a book, get your thoughts down. Like, yeah, it's so important in this society when we're going a million miles an hour. Space is the biggest gift you can give yourself.
This has been a really wide-ranging, surprising, in its depth and in its humor, as well as sometimes its real seriousness conversation. You shared a lot that I'm going to ponder over, think about, revisit, especially as I get deeper and deeper into the 50% rule book that is now sitting, in my couch a few feet away. If there is a single thing that I might take away from it, it is that the whole idea of authenticity is something that can exist on a dial, that it can be at a 10. Yeah, okay, y'all, I go to that 10. I have no problem with that. But if I think about it and I'm intentional, I can, as hard as it might be, sometimes dial it down to a 5, to a 3, and that there might be a comfort zone. I think you suggested maybe a 5 to 7 or a 3 to 5 or something like that. I'll need to listen to all of this again, which everyone should, but find that comfort level for authenticity on the dial and live in that and be willing to push and observe people. And if they seem like a crack might be existing in the facade, maybe go from that 5 to a 6 and see what happens. Erin, if there's anything that you wanted to reinforce or that you didn't get a chance to say so far, what might that be?
I would be doing a disservice if I didn't tell everyone listening to apply the 50% rule to what I just said. And what the 50% rule means on the surface is very simple. Only listen to about a half. Only take about half of what you heard from me and heard from Scott that resonates and feels true to you, feels right, and give yourself permission to throw out the other half and curate in other things you've heard and other podcasts and other ideas you had and smash it together. That's the thing that I think is causing sleep running syndrome is we're running so fast and we have so many gurus, podcasts, playbooks. I say in the book, other people's playbooks should be treated less like Waze, that app that helps you drive, right? Less like Waze and more like Walmart greeters. You should let them point you in the right direction, but you shouldn't follow them home. So treat us like your friendly Walmart greeters. Hopefully we've pointed you in the right direction. Hopefully the next podcast you do, the next playbook you listen to, the next person that you try to emulate, let them be a Walmart greeter for you. But don't follow them home necessarily. Do things your own way.
I absolutely love that. And I think the lawyers listening to this will particularly appreciate that, because as lawyers, right, we're taught to and habitually do things from beginning to end because those rules matter. And if you screw up a rule, particularly a court rule, punishment is like Artemis, throwing some plague down from the sky. So wow, what a relief that is to even contemplate. Erin, where can people find out more about you? Tell us about your projects, what you have going on, and anything else that you want to share about your professional, personal life, or just the awesomeness that's you.
I would point 3 places. Okay, I've got a website, 𝗵𝗲𝗺𝗔𝗍𝒻, just the letter 𝗵𝗲𝗺𝒻.com, but that could be overwhelming, right? There's books, there's podcasts, whatever. But if you want to stalk and peruse, that's a good place. Second, if you want to interact, LinkedIn is the best place to do that with me. So if you can spell my name, you can find me. I am the only Erin Hatzikostas in the world, or at least on the internet. Lastly, once you're done with your earbuds on the Myth Slayer, if you're a podcast listener, you could listen into Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck, which Scott was a guest on a bazillion years ago. It's just the letter B and then CAUSE, Work Doesn't Have to Suck. And it's a very, very authentic podcast that's focused on career and leadership tips that are about doing things differently, doing it your own way. Lots of stories, lots of humor, etc.
And I think anyone who just watched this will not be surprised to find out that it's really, really a great educational experience, but it's also something where you get to see someone fully being authentic.
Yeah, we definitely 50% ruled podcast just like you have, meaning half the episodes are normal-ish. I have interviews, ask questions, but half the episodes are with my co-host, 𝗦𝗶𝗆𝗆𝗍𝗔, who is, the way I describe her, she is Mensa level intelligence, Yale grad, Johns Hopkins. So she's my smartest friend, probably, arguably, and she is also my most inappropriate friend, arguably. And so those two things together create a lot of fodder, a lot of fun.
I want to make her my friend. That's not fair. How come she gets to be yours?
I'm telling you, I always say people come to the podcast for me and they stay for Nicole. She's a hoot. She's a hoot.
I absolutely love it. And for some additional information about Erin, including the links that you just referenced, Erin, of course, look at the caption right below this video. Erin, it has been a genuine pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was just nice to spend the hour with you.
It really was. And the Myth Slayer Cafe will be a little bit more authentic thanks to you having spent your time, energy, and effort into bringing that light right into the room. If you enjoyed this episode and want more, be sure to press the subscribe button and you'll get notifications every time we have something new come out. Also, make sure that you press the thumbs up and leave a comment. Tell Erin about how awesome she is. Or if you have a myth that you want interpreted or discussed on this show, or if you have leadership issues or problems that you would like us to address in our uniquely mythical way, we also want to hear about that. And yes, we do oblige those requests. Thank you so much for joining us at the Myth Slayer Cafe. And above all else, remember, I want your future to be epic.